Okay, before we get started today, does anybody have any questions about the last homework assignment? Overall, you guys did pretty well. There are a couple that, like, if I got the assignment late, I haven't graded it yet. I will do so probably this afternoon. Yeah, Haley.
Did you send it out? Because I don't recall ever getting the email. Because I emailed you, and I don't know if my email is messed up, but I tried emailing you, and it wouldn't go through.
What were you trying to send me?
I was trying to ask for it because I'd never received the email with the assignment.
Okay, the assignments are actually on the syllabus, and I describe them in class. I don't know that I ever sent an email with the assignment.
You sent an email just with the chapter of the, if anybody needed that chapter.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did send a chapter with. I did send a PDF of the chapter.
And the link to the article you wanted us to use.
Yes. Did you receive that? Okay, then let me know after. Like, do you still not have the textbook?
I actually picked that up today. They just got it in today.
Oh, okay. Then that's no longer an issue. But yeah, I'll make sure you have the article that you need to use for tonight's homework assignment, right? But does anybody have any other questions about the last homework assignment? Okay. Overall, I want to say, like, you guys did pretty well on it. I was actually pretty impressed with the work a lot of you turned in. There are the only thing that I want to note, and I didn't take points off for this because this was actually my fault, not yours, right? I forget that y'all don't default to Times New Roman 12-point font double spaced, right? So I didn't explain to you that that was what I wanted. But on future assignments going forward, that's what I want, right? For two reasons. One, because that is what the standard is in the academy. In general, that is what your instructors are going to want from you. You know, it's what people submit for publication and so on and so forth, right? And the reason why it's standard is because it's easier to read. So, you know, when you have kind of like small, close-packed text on a screen, right, please remember that I'm a good bit older than you and my eyes are probably weaker. So the easier to read what you're turning in is, the better. Now, I do just want to point out something on regarding the next assignment that I want you. The assignment that not that you're doing for tonight, for which you should already have the article, right? Did everybody get it? Everybody got the article that I want you to analyze?
That's the one that's due today.
For the one that's due today, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the one that I was talking about that I didn't.
Okay, is there anybody else? Okay, so if you didn't get the article I want you to analyze, then come see me after class, and I'll make sure that I get it to you. For this next assignment on page 97, if we could just turn there for a second if you have the book. Okay, so what this is asking you to do is build a paper from implications. Now, it gives you 4 kind of sample topics to choose from. I'm going to revise these a little bit because I think that things have changed a bit from when this book was published, that like some of these sample topics would actually be kind of hard for you to find materials for, right? So, changing trends in automobiles today, that's fine. What your local newspaper chooses to put on its front page or editorial page over the course of a week. Problem with our local newspaper is it only comes out once a week, right? So you might instead want to look at a paper with wider distribution, like, you know, maybe the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, right? So you can still do this one, just use a bigger paper. Shows or advertisements that appear on network television as opposed to cable during 1 hour of evening prime time. Does anybody even still watch TV that way anymore?
What way?
Like actually like sitting and watching watching a channel during prime time? Not so much. Yeah, like pretty much everything has switched to streaming for better or worse, right? So if you want to examine like TV ads, what you could do is maybe compare ads on something like YouTube to ads on a service like Hulu, right? And advertisements for Scotch whiskey and highbrow magazines. So what I'm going to say is you can compare there, if you want to choose that topic, any advertisements that are in a kind of print and text mode in any kind of publication or on a website, right? As long as they're for the same product. Because I'm guessing that one, you guys probably don't read a lot of magazines, like print magazines. And two, most of you probably don't really have much of an interest of or knowledge about Scotch whiskey, right? So, yeah, so just add those minor revisions to the assignment on page 97 as you're working on it. Okay, so does anybody have any questions about anything at all? Okay, then what I'd like to do today is start with a little bit of thinking practice, as we usually do, right? Just a little bit of linguistic analysis. So if you turn to page 25 in the textbook, if you don't have the textbook, if you can just kind of look on with somebody who does, right? But don't get too close to them. Okay, so what we're going to try to do here is pull out the implications from some of the statements listed here, right? So do you remember from last time what it is we're trying to do when we're trying to pull out implications? What are implications?
Something that's not directly stated.
Yeah, so implications are ideas that are suggested, right? But not directly stated. Right? Ideas that are kind of folded into the text. So it's not that it's not there. Please put the phone away. Like, that's my one basic rule in this class, is to keep the phone put away. Thank you. And if you could please find someone to, if you don't have the textbook, please find someone to work with. Okay, you do have it. All right, then please turn to page 25. All right. So where was I? So implications, right? So you're not looking for hidden or secret meanings here, right? These are things that are kind of, they're in the text. They're not, invisible, and you're not making shit up, right? But you have to read carefully to pull them out, right? So let's start with the first one here. The sidewalk is disappearing as a feature of the American residential landscape. So just sit with this for a minute, take your time, and think about what this implies, right? The sidewalk is disappearing as a feature of the American residential landscape. It generally helps to pick out certain key words. Define them, and then think about their range of associations. once you feel like you've got something, speak up.
So with this, are you potentially wanting us to like figure out what that sentence means?
Yeah, so first off, think about like so what does it mean that it's not directly stating, right?
That we're walking less and driving more.
Okay, walking less and driving more. Now explain to me how you got there.
It was talking about how the sidewalks are disappearing in like the residential areas. They used to be very common when like more people were walking to places and that stuff, and now that people are more dependent on cars. They're not walking as much, which means that they're not needed as much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not like a priority to have in those newer areas now.
Okay, good. Yeah, good. So yeah, good start. So people are walking less and driving more, right? Now it might also be a good idea to look at where they're disappearing. So they're disappearing from residential areas, right? So where does that mean people are driving to and from?
Home.
Yeah, from home.
To work.
Yeah, to work or shopping or whatever, right? So this also means that the places where people live are becoming more separate from the places where they work and shop, right? You can actually kind of see this if you look at Americus, right? If you look at the downtown of the historic district, right? Sidewalks all over the place, right? You know, as I was saying to some of you before class, right? Like I usually walk to and from work, right? I couldn't do that if there weren't decent sidewalks in this part of town. But the further out you go, right, to where there's newer construction, which is mostly residential, the sidewalks start to disappear, right? Even in a relatively small, contained town like this. So yeah, the older historic core retains this walkability, but as you go further out, it vanishes. Okay, good. So let's skip down here to number 3 here. This is from a poem by Robert Frost. Good fences make good neighbors. And again, first thing to do here is identify what the most important words are in the statement, right? What do you think are the key words here?
Neighbors and fences.
Okay, neighbors and fences. And are there any words in here that might have a potentially arguable definition?
Good.
Good.
Good. Yeah. Yes. Good. Is very, what's that?
What is that word next to it?
Arguable.
Arguable.
Yeah, good is relative, right? To the person doing the defining. Okay, so good fences make good neighbors, right? What's the function of a fence? What does a fence do?
Divides.
Yeah, it divides. It splits people up, right? It's a boundary. Good.
Could that also be argued as like privacy?
Well, I mean, that's its purpose, right? You build a fence for the sake of privacy, right? So how then does a good fence make a good neighbor? Like, what is the line from the poem here imply?
They're not always in each other's business. They have their own private areas.
Yeah, that a good neighbor, right? A good relationship between neighbors is one that respects boundaries, right? good neighbors give each other privacy, right, or respect each other's privacy. All right, let's look at number 6, a little further down here. Shopping malls and grocery stores rarely have clocks.
What
And
number
again,
is that?
it's number 6. Yep. Shopping malls and grocery stores rarely have clocks. And again, like, you know, there's no reason to rush this, right? Take your time. Slow thinking is usually better thinking.
To make people waste their time more.
That's
Staying
what I was
alone.
thinking.
Okay. So one implication of this, is that shopping centers don't want you thinking about time, right? Okay. Okay, keep going. See what else you can pull out of this. Might also be worth thinking about what else grocery stores and shopping malls usually don't have. Actually, that is less the case than it used to be, thank God. But
They're kind of all spread out.
okay.
We was talking about the bathrooms are spread out, so you have to walk further and it takes up more time than you're there.
Yeah.
You'll see other shops.
And you're going to have to walk past a lot of stuff, a lot of merchandise, a lot of shops to get to the bathrooms, sure. You ever been in a shopping mall that had windows?
No.
They usually don't have windows either, right? Yeah.
They don't want you to feel like you're wasting time.
Okay. Explain how you got there, James.
Well, if you have a window, you could see, the sun going down.
Uh-huh.
So that would imply that a lot of time has passed, depending on when you come in.
Yeah, and like, have you ever gone into a store or gone into a mall, and it's maybe 4 or 5 o'clock, and the sun is still up, and then by the time you come out, the sun's gone down. You feel a little disoriented. So maybe they want you feeling a little bit disoriented inside. Yeah, Brandon.
But so they want you to forget about the outside world, so you can
Okay.
stay longer and consume more.
Yeah, forget outside world. Yeah, if you spend more time, you will probably also spend more money, right? So there is also an implied relationship here between money and time. On the one hand, that these are both things that we talk about spending, right? As though they're a commodity. Well, I guess money is. You exchange money for goods and services, right? But we also tend to talk about time more or less the same way, right? Time is something that we spend or something that we waste, right? Or something that we save. So that might also be something to interrogate there, like the relationship between the way we talk and think about time and the way we talk and think about money.
What you give, you spend time to earn money.
Yeah. Which is actually, just a short digression, it's actually a fairly recent historical phenomenon. That is the way things work. But you spend time to earn money. Yeah. Whether that time is wasted, well, it probably depends on what you're doing. Let's take a quick look at number 4 now. Let's jump up to number 4. An increasing number of juveniles, people under the age of 18, are being tried and convicted as adults rather than as minors in America, with the result that more minors are serving adult sentences for crimes they committed while still in their teens. What's the major issue at stake in this statement? What's the broader issue it's concerned with?
Incarceration.
Okay, incarceration.
Minors.
Yeah, incarceration of minors in particular, right? So what kind of, again, like broader category of things might we put this into? Why do people get incarcerated, or at least theoretically?
Crime.
Yeah. So this is primarily an issue, it's about crime and punishment, right? So think about what this is implying about crime and punishments in America, right? What is this implying about American attitudes towards crime?
Kids are doing things that are so bad they have to be tried to an adult level.
Okay, that it may have to do with the severity of
Yeah.
crimes, right?
Yeah, severity.
Yeah, does it seem to have anything to do with an increase in actual crime? Yeah, it doesn't say that more juveniles are being arrested, right? It just says that they're being given harsher sentences, right?
That
They're
means
being-
that there's a higher severity of whatever it is, yeah.
Okay, yeah, it could mean that juveniles, could imply that juveniles are committing more severe crimes, right? What else could it imply that maybe isn't about the juveniles or the crimes themselves?
They could be like cracking down on trying to stop the spread of.
Law enforcement's gotten better or something.
Yeah, it could be more about law enforcement attitudes and judicial attitudes, right? That it could be that there's no change at all in the severity of the crimes, and simply that society overall is less tolerant of crime, right? And is thus adopting or voting for, tough on crime, justice policies and, hanging judges, right? Now, let's see how we read this in light of the statement that follows. Neuroscientists tell us that the frontal cortex of the brain, the part that is responsible for judgment and especially for impulse control, is not fully developed in humans until roughly the age of 21. So what's the implication of that, and how does it affect the way we read statement 4? Whether you agree with it or not, right?
That one's claiming that their brains aren't fully developed, like all the, that there's still more development to take place.
Yeah, the basic claim that's being made in number 5 here is that the juvenile brain is less developed than the adult brain, right?
Kind of like it's given number 4 like an excuse, sort of. But it's not an excuse, but like.
It was so. I think we're thinking along the right lines here. It's if we're again kind of like thinking with this sympathetically, right? Then it leads us to read the previous statements how.
As they might be doing it prematurely.
Yeah, as though maybe even though perhaps the crime itself is severe, right? That perhaps the offender in this case is less culpable because their capacity for impulse control is diminished, right? So the implication that this statement adds to the previous one is that we may very well be, as a society, punishing people too harshly for things that they have less control over, right? Now, the reason I wanted to do this one last is because it's an example of the bigger issue that I want to talk about today, right? Which is using context to produce an interpretation, right? That's exactly what we've just done here, right? We've taken one statement and we've added some contextual information to it, which changes the way we read the previous statement, right? So, what do we mean by context? What are we talking about when we talk about context?
The material, I'm trying to think of how to say it.
Like what we know outside of the article itself.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like it's outside knowledge is part of our context, right? When I ask you, say, to read a sentence and to use context to figure out what a word means, what am I asking you to do?
Use the material around it.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's just like, okay. So if you know what the words around it mean, right? You can make a pretty good guess at what that word means, yeah? So yeah, context is about situating your reading in order to develop meaning. So, any kind of information you can bring to bear on what you're reading that is relevant to it, that affects the way you interpret it, is a context, right? So, I want to work with this a little further. I have some text I want to give you here. This is one of the earliest American legal documents. It's called the Mayflower Compact. The language is going to be a little bit thorny, right? So, go slowly with it. And be careful, right?
Can we write on these?
Absolutely, yeah. In general, if I pass something out to you, I don't want it back. You can keep it and you can scribble all over it. So, what do we know about the Mayflower, if anything? What was the Mayflower?
Shit.
Brought people from
Yeah, the Mayflower was a ship, and it brought whom to where?
Puritan.
Yeah. The Pilgrims and the Puritans are actually slightly different groups who come at slightly different times, but they believe more or less the same things. So yeah, the ship that brought the people we call the Pilgrims to North America, right? Where'd they land?
Plymouth Rock.
Massachusetts.
Yeah, Plymouth Rock, Cape Cod, Massachusetts, right? What is now, what we now refer to as the state of Massachusetts. And what do we usually learn they were seeking in the New World? Why did they come here?
Freedom for their religion.
Yeah, freedom of religion specifically, right? Yeah. So what do we know about their English context that would have led them to seek freedom of religion in North America?
It was very
Not Catholic. Yeah, the Church of England, right, was the official state church of Great Britain, right? And who sat at the head of the Church of England? Who was the leader of the Church of England?
King.
Yes. So the king is not just the head of state, he's also the head of the church in England, right? So we're going to put this on the back burner for a moment, right? And what I want you to do first is just read through the document I've given you and look as per usual for strands and binaries, right? So look for patterns of repetition and look for patterns that seem to contrast. And go slowly, take your time, right? Remember that our first responses, our first answers, are usually superficial ones, right? The longer we look at something, even if it feels boring or frustrating, the more we can pull out of it. take your observations, try to organize them into lists and categories, right? Try to group together things that are similar. And pair up things that look like they're opposed. take 2 more minutes. And we'll see if we can make some sense out of this. Okay, so let's start with any strands that you identified. Where did y'all see patterns of repetition or similarity? Yeah, Chris.
Where it says in the name of God, grace of God, glory of God.
Okay.
That's cool.
All right, we've got name of, grace of, glory of God. Okay. Is there other language that's related to that theme?
Is there any other one?
What's that? Is there other language that's related to that particular theme or this wording?
Yeah.
Okay.
Presence of God.
Okay. There's a lot of gods, yes. Okay, Anno Domini, right? Year of our Lord in Latin, right?
There's another one that says the advancement of the Christian faith.
Okay.
Say repeated the Great Britain, France, Ireland, or there was more than that.
Uh-huh.
They are sovereign Lord King James, and then the of Great Britain, France, and Ireland.
Okay, I think that's a different strand, so let's pick that one up in a second, right? Yeah, Defender of the Faith is one of the titles that is officially given to the British monarch in their role as head of the Church of England, right? Do we see any other language that we've put into this category here?
Covenant.
Yeah, covenant, right? So covenant simply means an agreement, right? But it has a particular religious resonance because of, God's covenant with Noah and the covenant with Abraham and the covenant with the house of David and all that sort of thing, right? Anything else that we would put into that category? Or do we think we've pretty much got this one, this religious language category? Okay, so Haley, you were starting on something else.
A couple of times they had talked about the sovereign Lord King James, and then of Great Britain, France, Ireland.
Okay, sovereign Lord King James. Right, and list of his dominions and titles. Do we see anything else here that's related to the king or to royal power?
Dread.
Pardon?
Dread sovereign.
Okay, yeah, he is dread sovereign, Lord King James, right? Now, dread in 1620 doesn't mean quite the same thing it means in 2021, right? Dread here just sort of means awesome and powerful, right? Not dread as in we are afraid of him. More kind of we are in awe of him, right? What else? Anything else that relates to royalty or monarchy here? If we look at the purpose for which they say they have undertaken this voyage, what's number 3? They have honor of our king and country, right? Do we see any other patterns of repetition here? Yeah, Brandon.
But they refer to themselves as loyal and their submission and obedience.
Yeah, loyal, submission, obedience. Yeah, we got a kind of strand here of rule following, right? Good.
There's another one at the bottom.
Uh-huh.
Where it says in the reign of our sovereign Lord King James of England, France, all that.
Uh-huh. And yet, he's the 18th king of England, France, and Ireland.
Yeah, all that.
54th king of Scotland, good for him, right? Year of our Lord, 1620. So yeah, well, they both begin and end with their kind of invocation of the king, right? In fact, what's the only thing that comes before their invocation of the king? In the name of God. Yeah. Yeah. Before and after, there's in the name of God and then in the year of our Lord, right? So, why do you think they're putting these two things so close together?
Because they want whoever's reading it to know that they're God first, and then that they're still loyal to the king second.
Yeah. So, on the one hand, if we're thinking about our overall context here, right? Does this look like a group of people who are trying to consciously separate themselves from the king or from England? Or that do they still seem to regard themselves as English subjects?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they still seem to regard themselves as English subjects, right? And does there seem to be any direct note of rebellion in any of this? Yeah, there is all this talk about loyalty and submission and obedience, right? You know, they refer to themselves as subjects. And to be a subject in terms of political vocabulary is a little bit different from being a citizen, right? So a citizen has responsibilities, but also has rights, right? There are things that you owe to the government, but there are also things that the government owes to you. A subject, on the other hand, only has responsibilities. Right? So the idea of the citizen doesn't really emerge historically until about the end of the 18th century. So here we've got people who still clearly think of themselves as subjects. Brandon, you had a hand up a second ago. Sorry.
I was gonna say in the middle, it seemed kind of defiant how they were saying that they were gonna create their own civil political everybody and
Uh-huh.
It says R, it says for our better.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like
Uh-huh.
create laws and constitution and acts in their own betterment.
Yeah. As shall be thought the most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony. So they're doing this in the name of God and in the name of the king, right? And they still use the title Defender of the Faith in referring to the king. But yeah, they are talking here about setting up their own rules to follow, right?
Yeah, but right after they're done saying that, it says, unto which we promise all submission and obedience.
Mm-hmm. Well, are they, and I think if we parse that sentence here, right? Are they promising all due submission and obedience to the laws they come up with, or are they are they promising submission and obedience to the king?
Their own
Out of
law.
their own laws.
Yeah, they're professing submission here to their own rules, right? So, putting this into a kind of historical context actually kind of helps us to pull this otherwise kind of submerged strand out of this, right? If we weren't aware that the purpose of this voyage was at least in part to seek freedom of religion or free practice of religion, right? Then much of what we would be reading here would sound pretty submissive to King James, right? That this was, just like the earlier Virginia colony, right? That, these are people who came here to make money. But yeah, as Chris noted, putting in the name of God first, and then in the name of the king second, right? And then doing the same thing, kind of like bookending it that way, demonstrates a certain level of defiance. And yeah, as Brandon just noted, the fact that they're professing to form their own laws and follow them also demonstrates a certain amount of defiance, right? Now, if we're talking about the citizen-subject distinction here, right, then we're looking at this from a slightly different interpretive context, right? If we look at this, for example, in terms of early American legal documents, right? So if we compare this to things like the Declaration of Independence, like the Constitution, like the Bill of Rights, right? I'm not sure how familiar all you guys are with those particular documents, but what's different about the language of this from the language of those later documents?
They mention God as much.
Yeah, those later documents are a lot more secular, right?
This almost also seems more like a casual language instead of like how formal those other documents were.
Okay, so this sounds a little bit like less legalese. And yeah, and that would probably be in part because like the people who drafted this weren't lawyers, right? They were just, mostly, relatively prominent, well-educated citizens on a ship who are making a kind of gentleman's agreement, right, to form a new government for a new colony. So yeah, this isn't a set of rules that's being drafted by a formal process, right? So yeah, good. This is kind of more informal than what we get from say the committee that writes the Declaration of Independence or the group that attends the Constitutional Convention, right? There's also no talk here really of rights either, right? No notion of rights and no clear statement of any kind of grievance, right? Any expression of grievance is relatively subtle. And what pillar of later American legal documents is also clearly kind of missing from this? What does the First Amendment guarantee us, in addition to freedom of speech and association? Yeah, it does guarantee freedom of religion, right? But more specifically, it does that by separating church and state, right? Does this group seem to, they seem to regard God as more important than king, right? But do they seem to be making a clear distinction between church and government? Not so much. This is still very much steeped in religious language, right? As opposed, as we said, to the more secular founding documents of the actual republic, right? So, the reason I'm going through all of this with you is because the way we interpret this depends on the lens we're looking at it through, right? It depends on the context to which we're comparing it. So if we're looking at this as the product of particular historical moments, it looks a little different to us than it does if we're looking at it in comparison to other American founding documents, right? And really how this works is that context determines what points you emphasize. Right? It kind of helps you find the things that you actually want to ask questions about in whatever it is you're reading or studying. So, does anybody have any questions about any of this? You guys actually did a really good job with this in, frankly, less time than I expected. I thought you were going to struggle with the language a lot more in particular, frankly. But yeah, overall, good job. I mean, like we've got another 15 minutes in the period, but this was really all I had planned. Yeah, I'll let you go for now. Remember to get that assignment done for tonight if you haven't already. And again, if you still need a chapter from the textbook, right, please come and tell me, and I will remember to get that to you when I go back to my office.
I emailed you I know you got it, my scratch work
Yes.
before. Do you, because I took a picture of it with my phone and I airdropped it to my computer and then I uploaded it to the email that way. Would you want me to keep doing that for the rest of the scratch work, or?
If that's what works for you, yeah. I mean, that's like guys, like I'm not IT, right? I don't really understand how Georgia View works. I don't really know why it does the things it does, but yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, if it screws up something for you, just tell me,
Okay.
and we'll make arrangements.